All right. Hello, everybody. Well, I did not invite you all to my teledoc session, but I am a little under the weather, so please bear with me. This isn't the usual, but anyway, we'll get through it. Today, we have someone that has just been a sounding board for me as we lived through those COVID years. She is a war veteran of COVID and the related censorship wars in my mind. She's a patriot, and an unapologetic truth teller, and we are just absolutely thrilled and honored to have with us Dr. Sherry Tenpenny. Before we talk to Dr. Tenpenny, let me read the scripture of the day. Y'all, excuse me. Oh my goodness. Okay, it is Psalms chapter 21, verses 8 through 13. And it says, "Your almighty hands have captured your foes. You uncovered all who hate you, and you seized them. When you appear before them, unveiling the radiance of your face, they will be consumed by the fierce fire of your presence. Flames will swallow them up. They and their descendants will be destroyed by an unrelenting fire. We will watch them we will watch them fail, for these are ones who plan their evil schemes against the Lord. They will turn and run at the sight of your judgment arrow aimed straight at their hearts. Rise up and put your might on display. By your strength we will sing and praise your glorious power." And the Lord took me to Psalms 21 this morning, and I found this one pretty funny, but I was like, this is the kind of psalm that doesn't get many sermons preached about it. The modern church shies away from these kinds of psalms. And the theological term for these is imprecatory prayers. King David was famous for these, and they're all throughout the Psalms. We find David praying for the Lord to come and deal with his enemies, to bring justice to those who are evil. And these kinds of prayers are a necessary exercise if we want to see true justice. We can't just talk about all the good things we'd like to see the Lord do. We need to call on the Lord, acknowledging the foundations of his throne are righteousness and justice. And we need to ask him to deal with those who are wicked, those who have made themselves his enemies and the enemies of the people. And as we were saying before the show with Dr. Tenpenny, a lot of those evil people have been busy exposing themselves in these hearings.
Danielle, it's such an interesting point you make. Modern day religion minimizes imprecatory prayer. Modern day religion minimizes the fact that there is good and there is evil in
Yeah.
this world. And it's not all black and white, and I've never thought that, but there clearly is evil and there clearly is good. And our responsibility, according and pursuant to the Old Testament, is to figure out this day where we stand. Do we stand with evil or do we stand with good? It's just so timely that you would talk about the importance of imprecatory prayer, but the premise of imprecatory prayer is the fact that good and evil do in fact exist, and by
Yeah.
God's grace we are on the right side, and so that we can rightly and justly ask God to dismantle our enemies. What a timely prayer! Speaking of someone who has been on the right side, based upon what I've read about this fine lady, Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, a trained osteopathic physician, the author of multiple books on vaccines and vaccination, and has been such a resounding voice warning against the potential harms of the COVID vaccine and probably others as well. Dr. Tenpenny, thank you so much for joining us for a little while in the State of Freedom today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a great day to be talking about all of these things. And I was just thinking about that verse that you read, Danielle. I was thinking, man, that just so represents what's happening in these Senate hearings. I've listened to a lot of them. I've listened to a lot of them that have gone on, and it's like you could just tell the difference between the senates, the senators, the people, the candidates that they're like, yeah, sure, we'll just pass them on through, and they give them a bunch of softball questions, and then they take other people and literally take a ball bat to them, and they
Yeah.
expose their evil side. And I kept thinking this whole time, these are the people who are sitting in Washington, D.C. and passing bills and put us into further into debt and are the ones who are making laws and rules to regulate me, these people.
Right.
It was really pretty despicable, some of the ways that these people behaved. In fact, a friend of mine sent me this thing that it's just great. She said my dad made a point of these hearings yesterday, of the Democrats on the finance committee when they were interrogating Bobby Kennedy. Number one, ask stupid but very detailed questions. Number two, harangue the candidate. Number three, don't give him a chance to answer the complex questions. Number four, then accuse him for being non responsive. And I think that really,
It's a very good synopsis.
it really summed it up. And it seems like on some of the other more, like I've been listening to Cash Patel's today, man, he's been on fire. And I listened to Pete Hegseth last week, and they really, man, they stood their ground. And I hope
Yeah.
that Bobby really showed his integrity. And he just has so much to say, and he could barely say two words to
Yeah.
these vipers that were sitting up there.
And the fact that they sit there and nitpick that he doesn't know every regulation of Medicaid or the CMC or whatever it is that
Well,
they're
the
talking
CMS,
about.
I was
CMS,
really
yeah.
surprised at how they were hammering him on all these questions about CMS. I mean, first of all, CMS falls under HHS, but it's not like he's going to be sitting as the director of CMS.
Yeah.
That's Dr. Oz that's been nominated as a candidate for that. And so it's sort of like in any big organization that has 91,000 employees,
Which
you
is the
have directors
despicable
that
to start.
report up to you, that report
Yeah.
up to you. It's
Yeah.
not like you're sitting at every desk doing everything
Yeah.
and asking about all these drug pricing things. It's like this. The secretary of HHS is like the director of the orchestra. He needs to set the agenda, put everybody moving in the right direction in the same way, and solve problems, just like any CEO of big companies. And the questions that they asked him, the specific things about HHS or I mean, I'm sorry, about CMS, about was he going to close nursing homes, about school lunches, all these different things in terms of the specifics of the dollars. It's like, what's wrong with you people? You're specifically asking him questions to try to be gotcha
Yeah.
questions.
And
It's
they didn't
awful.
do themselves, Dr. Tenpenny, they didn't do themselves any favors.
I
And
hope you're correct.
yeah, I believe so. As Danielle said pre show, one of the concerns that we have now is how Dr. Bill Cassidy, who is actually the chair of that health committee, how he's going to vote. We know that he has taken enormous amounts of money from the pharmaceutical industry. And so, what we'll do is weigh that interest that he has against the many, many communications and pressure that he's receiving from Louisiana citizens across the state to see what he does. And hopefully he does the right thing. But, you
Well,
know,
he started out the day today talking about the hepatitis B vaccine has decreased the incidence of hepatitis B in this country. Well, there were only 14,000 cases of hepatitis B nationwide in age groups from 0 to 18 back in 1991 when they started this. There were only 14,000 cases.
yeah. And I think RFK Jr. responded to him, I thought, very deftly, to the extent that he was able to respond. I thought he did a very good job. But, it's almost axiomatic that when you want to move the needle, when you want to move the world and move your profession or move society toward a greater level of righteousness, and you act on that, you are going to be persecuted, you're going to be opposed, and you're going to be ridiculed. And so I want to ask you something that I know will be of great interest to our listeners today about your experience with the medical disciplinary board in Ohio as a result of your courageous advocacy regarding the COVID vaccine and its potential dangers. And I'm sure that I'm oversimplifying it. I just want to give you an opportunity to talk about that, how that came about, and how that developed.
Well, this happened back in 2021. And so, keeping in mind that the vaccines were first released in December of 2020 and January of 21, is when Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J and AstraZeneca all rolled out in that 14-day or so period of time, plus or minus a couple of weeks. I was asked in June to come to the State House and testify in front of the Health Committee about the mandates that they were, the vaccine mandates that they were weighing. And so I did. And so I went, so when I testified for that, um, the media took everything that I said really out of context. Like one of the things that I said, they did all this thing about, oh well, Dr. Tenpenny thinks people get magnetized after the COVID shots, which was then on Peter Jennings, or not Peter Jennings, on
And
Brian Williams. It was,
currently on Wikipedia, by the way.
oh yes, well I'll tell you a story about Wikipedia in a minute after I tell you this story. It was like all of the, Jimmy Kimmel and all those people were talking about, oh, so I got labeled as this magnet doctor. Well, what people don't know about that is how out of context that was taken. The Senate, one of the representatives sitting in the room had asked me the question, have you seen any unusual side effects or complications from the COVID shots? And I said, well, I'm sure all of you have seen all over the internet these things about magnetic things where people are cell phones are sticking to their arms and coins are sticking to their heads. Um, I don't know if that needs to be investigated. That's what the real answer was. And that was the question that prompted me for saying that, was I answered a question that was asked to me. I didn't just talk about that information. Well, since that time, we have now proven that that's true. There's all kinds of studies that have shown, the radiation and the different things that have come off of the graphene oxide, the nanobots, all of the lipid nanoparticle things that are in the vaccines. And I'll tell you a really quick story about that is that after I said that, it went all over the news and, made me look like some idiot, a couple of weekends later, I was asked to speak at a Patriot get together here in Cleveland. There was maybe 200 people at this meeting. And so they came in and they asked me to speak. Well, the guy that was introducing me, that invited me to this meeting, he said, I have to tell you about something. He said, last night, my wife and I went to dinner and she's had a COVID shot. I have not. And she said, oh, she's that crazy doctor that talks about this magnetic stuff and coins sticking to your body and all that stuff. And he said, well, I'm not sure it's so crazy. And she said, it's really crazy. Watch. And she took a coin out of her pocket and put it on her forehead and it stuck. And,
Wow.
and she's like, wait a minute, let me put it over here. And it stuck. And
Oh dear.
so she said, well, maybe there's something to this that kind of went away. It was like a big thing on the internet, but they've made it and they've continued to make it a really bad thing since then. Well, after that, that was in June of 21. August or September of 21, I got a letter from my state medical board to answer 33 self-incriminatory questions. And they sent it to me by mail, by certified mail, by personal delivery, and by FedEx. So they wanted to make sure that I got it and I couldn't claim that I never got their letter, right? So
Yeah.
they sent it to me by all those things. I talked to and it was 22 pages long. And when I
Grief.
opened up the letter and I'm flipping through the letter, because I've had state medical boards question me about things in the past that were, okay, we answered their question, they went away, I went on my business, and that was it. So I'm flipping through this thing, and it's like quotes that I've said off of podcasts and different things that I've written in my Substack. And I'm getting to the end. I'm flipping through these 22 pages, and I said, okay, what do they want? What do they want? What do they want? I get to the last page, and they say, here, you are hereby required to go to University Hospital on such and such date at such and such time and meet with a psychiatrist for a mental
What?
status evaluation. And oh, by the way, take a $2,000 check to pay them. Exactly. That
I
was,
would have told him where to put
So
it.
their response to your testimony
I was
before the
crazy.
state legislative committee basically was that, okay, this lady's crazy and needs to be evaluated.
Yeah, and it was funny because I talked to my lawyer about, I mean, I read it and I like, wait a minute, there are a lot of things they can accuse me of, but being crazy is not one of them.
Right.
And being like telling lies, which I don't. There's a lot of things they could accuse me of, but being crazy is not one of them. So we wrote them a response and said, according to Ohio state laws, and he quoted things out of the Ohio Revised Code, that in order to require someone in the state of Ohio, and I don't know if this is everywhere, but at least in the state of Ohio, if you want to require a professional to have a mental status exam by a psychiatrist, they have to meet like there's like 6 or 7 criteria, of which I met none of them. And so they basically said, here's your answer. And then they sent me another letter with a list of interrogatories that were, like I said, 33 interrogatories that were really incriminating. And so we sent it back and said, we're not going to answer this because these are self incriminatory. We're not doing this. Then they sent another letter and said, you are to appear in front of the state medical board and you have to come alone. You cannot bring your attorney.
And Dr. Tenpenny, at this point, just to clarify, you had not been charged with any disciplinary infraction at this point.
No, there was no malpractice. There's no anything involved with this. So when we got that third letter, they said, "Well, I think that's kind of an infringement on your constitutional rights that you can't go to a meeting with your attorney." And then they sent 1 or 2 more other letters. That each one of those letters, we responded legally and sent the questions back. And so then finally, they said they called a hearing that I had to show up to, and they suspended my license indefinitely because I failed to cooperate with their investigation. And
That's
my
sick.
attorney said, well, just because they didn't like the answer didn't mean we didn't cooperate with them.
Right.
And so that was the whole crux of the matter is they said, until you cooperate with us, until you answer our questions, until you do what we tell you to do, we're suspending your license.
And you
Wow.
said,
Okay.
I don't negotiate with terrorists.
Pretty much.
Right, exactly.
So then about a year later, um, I was like, well, I didn't really, okay, whatever, because I really was barely seeing patients at that point, anyways, because I was doing a lot of other things. I was only seeing patients like 1.5 days a week. So it wasn't such a huge infraction on me or my patients or economically or anything like that. And I said, okay.
Yeah.
Well, about a year later, I started having to fill out some applications for various things. And one of the questions was, have you been or are you under any investigation by your state medical board? And I thought, you know what? I've got to get rid of this because this is going to be like toilet paper on the heel of my shoe for the rest of my life if I have to drag
Yeah.
this thing around. So I talked to my attorney. I said, send me those questions they wanted me to answer. And so now it's 3 years later. It's now we've gone through all these letters and all this stuff. This is at the end of 23 going into 24. Remember that
Meanwhile, you've been suspended from the practice of medicine for how long now?
it was a year. And so from the time they sent the first letter till all the communications and all that stuff, this is now end of 23 at the beginning of 24. So I looked at those questions, which were at the time of 21, very self-incriminatory, like, what are your positions on a COVID vaccine? Would you ever give anyone a COVID vaccine injection? How many COVID vaccines have you given in your office? Since you recommend people to not get vaccines, how many people have gotten measles because you haven't? I said, well, first of all,
Oh
I
my
never
gosh.
recommend to not get vaccines. I give people the pros and the cons. Here's what's in it. Here's what it's for. Here's what you can do if your child gets sick if they're not vaccinated. And here's what's in the vaccine. And now you can choose. And I said, so they asked me 22 questions like that. Like, how many people said if they have not taken a vaccine based on what you said, how many people in your practice have gotten sick? And I said, well, none. And one of the things that they said, one of the questions was, since you have a position on vaccines, has it cost you any patients? And my answer was quite to the contrary. A lot of people come here because they like a doctor who's willing to work with them and give them fully informed consent and allow them to make a choice.
Yeah.
And then one of the questions is, would you vaccinate them? No, I would not. But if they choose to be vaccinated, they can go to a family doctor, they can go to a public health clinic, they can go to the hospital. There's a lot of different places. If they want to get vaccinated, I'm just not personally going to do it. So I looked at all these questions and I answered all 33 of their questions. We notarized it, sent it back to them and said, okay, uncle, I give. Here's the answer to your questions. And then they still didn't answer back for months. And so then finally, my attorney called the attorney for the state medical board and said, tomorrow we are filing a writ of mandamus with the court. And for your listeners, a writ of mandamus is like forcing the medical board to do their job and answer my questions. And he said, this is going to be really unique because you're actually asking the court to fully, for them to investigate you. He said, so the judge is going to go, this is kind of interesting. So he called the attorney the night before and he said, this is what we're going to do. And the attorney for the state medical board called an emergency meeting of the state medical board and asked them to look at my answers. And the next morning, their attorney called my attorney back and said, they've agreed that she's cooperated now and they're going to release her license.
Reinstate your license.
Now the interesting part about that is there's 15 votes, I believe 15 or 13. It's an uneven number of people who vote on the state medical board. There were two people that abstained and two people that voted against reinstating my license.
Do you know who they are?
Yeah, I do. I have their names. And
But the vote, Dr. Tenpenny, was nonetheless overwhelming for reinstatement.
it was overwhelming because they had no reason to not reinstate it. This
Yeah.
wasn't a malpractice suit. There wasn't anything that I did that was illegal, abnormal, immoral, anything like that. This was a censorship issue.
Were
They
you ever
censoring
were
me.
you ever formally charged by the
No,
medical board with any violation?
no. Their only thing was I failed to cooperate. In fact, on the day of the hearing, there were four of the people on the board that were sitting up. It's kind of looks like these Senate hearings. They sit up here and you sit
Right.
down here.
Mhm.
And two of the people, either two or three, read statements into the record. And one of the gentlemen that read a statement into the record said, this is not about Dr. Tenpenny's position on vaccines. It's not about what she said in front of the health committee. It's not all the things they've said in the media about her and this whole thing about magnetism. It is about her failure to cooperate with us in our investigation. Wait a minute. I did cooperate every step of the way.
Yeah,
So
that's so crazy.
that's the full gamut of what happened. And then they reinstated my license. And
So you have so you have a situation where you are meeting with patients, you have a personal interaction with your patients based on your knowledge of your patient's background and propensities. You're making certain medical recommendations to them based upon your background, your expertise, and your knowledge. And this bureaucracy is interjecting itself directly between you and your patients.
the community. I mean, because I have been educating the community on the truth about vaccines for a little over 24 years. And interestingly enough, I've had the state medical board call me a bunch of times and about nonsensical things. And I learned that our state medical board in the state of Ohio is divided into, there's like six sections, and there's a medical investigator per section, like so many counties.
Okay.
So the guy who was the investigator of Northeast Ohio, because I live in Cleveland, in the Northeast Ohio, he and I talked to each other quite a few times over the years, kind of got to know each other. And he had said to me several times, he said, I think that you just practice good medicine. They just need to leave you alone.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so, he's, and so I had talked to them several times. And one of the times, one of the investigators that called me said, so what kind of medicine do you practice anyway? I said, the very best kind. We spend a lot of time with our patients. We order appropriate tests. We offer them a pharmaceutical solution, but we usually use nutraceuticals, supplements, lifestyle, and diet, and other types of things to get them better. But we will write them a prescription if it's necessary or if they would prefer that. So we have, and the gal from the state board, she said to me, "Huh, if I lived closer, I'd come and see you." So,
me
Dr.
too.
Tenpenny, were you ever given an opportunity within the context of this investigation to present the merits of your position, of your medical data, of your knowledge to this board?
no. And one time, one of the investigators that I talked to said, "Well, you may or may not know this, but there's two nurses." This was back before I was permanently banned from Facebook, Instagram, PayPal, and Podbean, which I still am, by the way.
Gosh.
And so she said, this was a while ago. This was way before COVID. She said there's two nurses that work for the state medical board that lurk on your Facebook page. And they're always talking about how much they learn and how much they're learning about things that they never had any idea about. So I know that it's made a big impact in a lot
Yeah.
of different ways. A lot of people know what I do and why. But what I'm basically doing is looking at the medical literature. Looking, I have a collection of more than 17,000 articles from mainstream peer-reviewed published publications that show problems associated with vaccines. So I'll take an article and kind of put it into layman's terms and sort of explain it, and then have the footnote or the link or whatever to the article so people can go read it for themselves. And that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 24 years, including, after 50,000 hours worth of research and 24 and a half years of study, I can solidly say I have come to the conclusion that vaccines are not safe. They've never been proven to be safe. They're not effective. You can get the vaccine and still get the infection, anyways, including tetanus. They are not necessary because the unvaccinated kids we have in our practice are the healthiest. They never get sick. They come in once a year for a school physical. And every single vaccine, every one of them causes harm, even if it just means shaving a few IQ points off. It bangs up your immune system. It causes asthma, allergies, eczema, ADD, ADHD, insulin dependent diabetes, a long list of neurological complications, a long list of cancers, and even death.
Yeah.
So for all of these, listening to this hearings from Bobby Kennedy for the last 2 days, I just wanted to throw a shoe at my computer, because if I heard them say one more time, we can't withhold life saving vaccines from the general public. I thought the best quote of the day yesterday was at the end of the hearing, when some reporter nabbed Senator Warren, Elizabeth Warren, in the hall, and she said, if we let him be confirmed, he might bankrupt the pharmaceutical industry so nobody gets vaccines.
Yeah. Exactly. I
Yeah.
think
Yay!
I think what they mean by life-saving vaccines is lifestyle saving
Yeah.
vaccines,
Saving their
saving their
lives.
lifestyles of the rich and famous, while all the rest of us are the ones that suffer. So, yeah,
Your
absolutely.
Senator Cassidy started the hearing this morning, telling a story about a hepatitis B victim. You probably heard him talk about it. That he had a little baby that ended up with liver failure, and I think he's a gastroenterologist or a gastrointestinal surgeon or something
I
like
don't
that.
know.
And he said, that all of these complications and this liver transplant could have been stopped if she could have just gotten the hepatitis B vaccine. And I wish that Bobby would have responded to that by saying, yes, there are tragic cases. They are one offs, but we don't have to vaccinate 4 million people a year for that one off.
Yeah.
But Senator Rand Paul took him to task on that. And he said, I think that the biggest problem with the hepatitis B vaccine is, who wants to give that to their baby at birth,
Right.
the day that they're born? I mean, hepatitis B comes from sexual exchanges or IV drug abuse, and prostitution and rectal sex in homosexual men. And that's where it all came from. And that's where the main population is. Why are we giving this to 1 day old babies? I mean,
Yeah.
Rand Paul really took him to task.
Yeah, he
And,
sure did. And I
and
did see
it's,
that exchange, and I thought that Rand Paul, I thought Cassidy had crossed swords at that moment with someone too strong for him, because Rand Paul did a wonderful job in that exchange. No question about that.
and I think was it Senator Mullins? I think he also said the
Probably.
same, said, my kids have gotten vaccinated and I feel like they're just being a pincushion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it was interesting. The other senator, the guy from Tennessee, Tooley, is that his name? Tulsi. Anyways, he said, I'm just about ready to have my first grandbaby, and his parents have done their investigation, and that child is not going to be a pincushion. So,
That's
in
so
so
great.
many words, he was saying, my children have investigated vaccines and have decided not to vaccinate. Na 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 na
Yeah.
na. You know?
Well, Dr. Tidpenny, thank you so much for standing your ground on this, because your name has been run through the mud. You've had to make a lot of personal sacrifices. I mean, the canceling of your accounts and just being cut off from a lot of modes of communication. And many of us counted on your voice and just were so happy to have your voice when we were trying to make sense of what was going on during COVID. So thank you so much for not bowing to the medical establishment. We see so much corruption and censorship and manipulation from these professional boards. It's absolutely just mind boggling that they seem to run roughshod over people who may take a different approach, may have a different belief system, may have a more traditional, holistic approach. Do you think it's time for us to start thinking about decentralizing professional associations? I mean, why should they be able to hold your license hostage just because they don't like what you're saying? I mean, really, it's a First Amendment violation because, like you said, there was nothing that you did that was wrong, harmful, or negligent.
Yeah, well, they tried to do that in California. Back at I'd say 22, maybe in 2022, the California State Medical Board said if any of you doctors, any of you guys, DOs, MDs, chiropractors, if any of you guys try to tell your patients to warn them not to get the COVID vaccines because they're not vaccines, they're bioweapons, and all the risk factors that go along with them. I mean, the first tranche of Pfizer papers that got released, there was a 38-page paper in there that the last 8 pages of those papers, single space line item, more than 1,200 diseases, conditions, and side effects caused by the Pfizer shot that they knew about before they even released it.
Yeah.
And Naomi's Wolf on the Pfizer papers, it's a big book, and it's actually really lays out the crimes against humanity. So in California, they were saying, no, 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 none of you guys, if we get a report that you've tried to discourage anyone from getting a COVID vaccine, including your baby or including pregnant women, we are going to not only sanction your license, but revoke it. And a couple of doctors out in California said, there ain't no way I'm doing that, hoser. And they sued them on First Amendment rights and doctor-patient relationships. And the doctors are allowed to have opinions that can be different from the government, and they won. And so
Awesome.
I'm so happy to hear that because it is such a nefarious precedent.
absolutely.
When you um, allow these boards to interject themselves between a doctor and their patients, or try to impede a doctor's ability to express an educated opinion based upon his or her knowledge and experience. It's imagine what kind of a country do we live in when that is allowed to occur. It's truly unbelievable. But let me ask you about this, Dr. Tenpenny. Um, RFK Jr. Has talked a lot about a concept called regulatory capture. And it is where you have these federal agencies, these federal health agencies, who are charged with regulating the conduct and the pharmaceutical practice, the medical practice of these companies. And yet, these very same health agencies are receiving billions and billions and billions of dollars from the very companies that they are supposed to be regulating. And not only that, but the elected officials who are responsible for oversight over these health agencies and over the pharmaceutical industry are very often receiving a tremendous amount of money from those same industries. How is it possible to have a healthy system that we can rely on and know that the things that we are being offered that we're supposed to consume in our body purportedly for our health are actually good for us when that is the structure, when that is the reality?
The bottom line is we can't. And we can't have a healthy system because of that. Bobby's made a big deal about talking that there are like in his testimony today, he said, if you go to McDonald's and you get an order of French fries, there's 10 ingredients in that. If you order that same French fries, same McDonald's French fries in Europe, there's 3 ingredients. There's potatoes, salt, and oil. And now, in the United States, it's different. There's more than 3,000 food additives that have been put into our food. that thousands of them have been banned, outright banned as carcinogen, addictive, causing all kinds of neurological issues, maybe causing eczema, all sorts of things, just like when they just s- decided to ban red dye 3. I'll talk about that in a second. But we can't have a country that's healthy, that's vaccinating their kids with 32 vaccines by 2 years of age, long before they had their first Cheerios and table food, right? We can't
Yeah.
have it of a healthy country that their food has been adulterated by vaccines. There are more than 50 vaccines approved to be used in fish. There are more than 200 vaccines that we give to, that are approved for chickens and cows.
They're
And
vaccinating fish? I'm sorry. That
yes,
is one of the wildest things I've ever heard. How I can't even
and
figure
there's
out how
three
that would
different ways
happen.
that they can vaccinate fish. One is they put them in a vat of vaccine and let them swim around in it,
Oh god.
or they put them in a vat of vaccine and then they only have to swim around in there for a few minutes, or they put them in a vat that's mostly water with a little vaccine, but they have to swim around for a longer period of time, or they can inject them into the muscle of the fish, or they can inject it into the belly of the fish, the
These people
intraperitoneal
have too
injection.
much time on their hands.
Well, Norway vaccinates almost 3 million fish per year, and
That's
if you
big
go out
money,
if
isn't
you go
it?
out very big money, and if you go out to the Atlantic Ocean and you catch a free swimming salmon out there in the ocean, you can be fined for that because it's considered an endangered species,
Oh
because
my
all of the fish,
gosh.
all the salmon now are farmed. And the biggest industry in Norway is their big farm raised fish thing, and there's 50 different vaccines for various different species in various different parts of the world. There's more
What do
than
you
three.
eat, Dr. Tenpenny? I'm sorry for taking you off of this, but like if we can't even trust that our fish aren't vaccinated, which you could just make a giant assumption that fish would be unvaccinated, free floating out in the ocean, free swimming out in the ocean or in the Gulf or in the bayous where I am, what can you trust?
Well, you do have to get, non-farm raised fish. So when you go to a restaurant, a lot of, always ask, is this farm raised or not? And most of the time that it is. But if you go to specialty restaurants that cater to people who like to be conscious about their food, they will say they'll use organic butter. They'll have gluten-free bread that will be available for you. They'll have fish that is free ranged, and you can get free ranged cattle. Know if you're going to eat locally, know your rancher, know the people, raise your own chickens if you can. If you can't, know how the chickens are raised, where you get your meat and where you get your eggs. And so it's really about conscious. We have to be ever vigilant about conscious eating anymore, because they have adulterated our food so badly, which goes back to Chris's question about regulatory capture.
Yeah.
When you've got big ag that has captured the EPA, and you've got big pharma that's captured the FDA, and you've got big tech that's captured the FTC and all those things about 5G
Yeah.
EMF radiations, and you've got the big conglomerates. We really don't live in a constitutional republic anymore. We really live in a fascist society, and a fascist society by definition is run by governments, or run by big industries. And
Wow.
so when you know that, like, for example, yesterday, when during Bobby Kennedy's hearing, when Senator Hansen made all these hysterical accusations about how much money the anti-vaxxers are making off of their propaganda. Well, except that she's already received $468,000 from the pharmaceutical industry. Senator Sanders, who made all this nonsensical stuff about the onesies that Children's Health Defense sells for $26 a onesie, that he's already taken 1.9 million, almost 1.95 million dollars from the pharmaceutical industry. Um, and Carolyn Kennedy, when she came out with all this nasty stuff about Bobby being my cousin and he's not qualified, her disclosure shows that she has a significant position in Bristol Myers Squibb, Eli Lilly, and Johnson and Johnson. So perhaps she's another one of the people who doesn't want anything to change in healthcare, and
Yeah.
doesn't want the regulatory capture to change. I mean,
Yeah.
like the actual um, like the line item budget for the FDA. I think the number is somewhere between, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, Chris. but I think it's somewhere between 25 and 30% of the annual FDA's budget comes from pharmaceutical payments to put them to the head of the line so
That's
that
exactly right,
they
and
can fast.
that's a RFK Jr. has said that, and I think written that in one of his books.
Yeah, that it's so instead of waiting in line and to have the actual scientists and researchers at FDA do their due diligence like they're supposed to bring a drug to the market, the pharmaceutical industry can bring it to the head of the line and fast track the approval,
It's
just
a
like they did
sanctioned bribe.
with the EUA, a whole nonsense that they violated 3 federal laws to bring the COVID vaccines to
Yeah.
market.
Yeah.
Sanctioned bribe. I like that, Danielle.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sanctioned bribe. What a good
That's what it
phrase.
is.
yeah.
Well, I
Yeah.
inside of Pfizer government relations, I can tell you the U.S. team fought pretty hard for that every time it came up for renewal. So I think it's called PDUFA. I don't know what those letters stand for, but acronym world.
Yeah.
Um, Dr. Tenpenny, we've been talking a little bit about RFK Jr. What do you think about him as the candidate for Secretary of HHS? I feel like during his hearing, he's held his cards pretty close to his chest because of the environment he's in. So I totally get that. Um, but and we've talked already about how it has been exposing the corruption and really ignorance, or stupidity. I mean, if we're going to be honest, of some of these senators. In your view, why is it so important? Your perspective as a doctor, but also someone who wants to eat healthy food and trust where it comes from. Why is it so serious that he gets confirmed?
Because he's the first outsider that we've had in that big of a powerful position in more than a decade. Over the last 10 HHS directors, only 3 have been physicians, and that was early on. All the rest of them were either attorneys or politicians who just rubber stamped whatever the pharmaceutical industry wanted. We didn't have anybody that stood up and said, now, wait just a minute. Wait a minute. This isn't good. This is not right. This is not what the science said. I think that Bobby was sort of in his, I listened to both of those hearings. I just, at the end of the second one, I couldn't listen to those Democrats talk anymore. I just couldn't
I don't know
stand to
how you
listen.
made it through as much
They're,
as you did.
so I was watching when I was watching out of the corner of my eye, when they were talking, I'd turn off the volume. And then when somebody else would talk, or when Bobby was
Yeah.
answering, I'd turn on the volume because if I heard them say one more time, we cannot do anything with these life saving vaccines, except for the fact that there were 1.7 million people that filed a VAERS report because they were injured from the COVID shot. There are 30,000 people that file a VAERS report every single year. And that we estimate that's only 10% of people who are actually injured or figured out that why they don't feel good is because of the vaccines that they were getting. It's so important to have Bobby in there because he's the first time that there's even ever been like a crack in the door for honest to goodness, patriot and health freedom sort of concepts to make their way up in through government because before it
Yeah.
was just a closed door. The
That's great. It's
second
a
thing is,
great point.
the other thing is that Bobby is, I've known Bobby for more than 10 years. We've run in the same circles and spoken on the same stage and had dinner together and blah, blah, blah. He's wicked smart. I mean, if he doesn't have a photographic memory, it's very close
Wow.
because he can remember numbers, dates, studies, all these different things. He's really, really smart. So he has the mental capacity to take all this stuff in. He also, and like he said in his hearing, he's in the very unique position to having sued these agencies before. So he knows how they run. He
Yeah.
knows and this is part of the reason they're so against him. He knows where some of the dead bodies lie. He knows what's going on behind the scenes. Will have the ability to lift the lid off of those stinky pots of things like BARDA and Gavi and all of those
Yeah.
contracts that are just money laundering in the pharmaceutical industry. He's going to be in a position to uncover things that have been buried for decades.
Right. And he's being criticized by these Democrat committee members because he has litigated cases against pharmaceutical companies and won very significant jury verdicts based upon a full and total evaluation of the evidence and the facts by those juries who saw fit to to find that these pharmaceutical companies were liable, and yet he gets criticized for accepting money for working hard and
For
litigating those
doing his
cases by the
job,
very
for doing
people
his job.
who are accepting hundreds of thousands of
And
dollars from
millions.
those
Yeah,
industries. It is, I mean, the hypocrisy is just absolutely filthy
it
You know,
is.
when
when
they
you really
came
look
out
at
when
it.
they came out with the disinformation dozen, I was one of those disinformation dozen people, and so was Bobby, so was Sayer G, and Mercola, and the
Hmm.
Bollingers, and a whole bunch of us, Chris Northrup. But they tried to make a big deal about how by propagating myths and misinformation and peddling lies and conspiracy theories, how we were all getting rich and wealthy off of this. And I had written an article that we looked at, maybe there's 12 of us, that maybe over the last 3 to 4 years collectively, we may have made maybe $2 million, which divide that by 12. That's not
Right.
over years. That's not a lot. And then how much money does the CEO of Pfizer make? How
I
much
can't
money does
even
the
tell
CEO
you.
of Moderna make?
Double digit millions.
Exactly. So propagating their myths and their
Exactly.
lies and what they're telling us about safe, effective, protect you. It's like, don't pull the money card. That's a really big. Listen, opposition. I'm going to give you a little hint here about playing poker. Don't pull the money card. You're going to lose every time.
That's right.
Absolutely,
Now,
absolutely.
Dr. Tidpenny, what's on your wish list? If Bobby when Bobby gets in, if you had your absolute pick, your punch list for the things that he got done, what would be on that list?
Um, and one of the things that I'm hoping that he'll ask me to do when he gets in, and a few of us other in this circle, is hope that he puts together an advisory committee on vaccines, like he was supposed to do underneath Trump in his first go around. I hope that there are people that really know the science, really know the research. I really know the information, and he puts together a collaborative vaccine advisory committee that are going to look at these things. And I personally would like to be the one who stands in front of these idiot senators and say, "Have any of you ever read a package insert? Do you have any idea
Well,
what's
there
in
was,
the?"
from my understanding, Dr. Tenpenny, there was not a package insert on some
on
of
co-
these
on the
on some of these
COVID
COVID
vaccine.
vaccines at
Yeah.
all. There was just nothing in there.
Well, not at the beginning. They eventually did, but in the first 2 years they didn't. You're absolutely right. But what about, have you read? You keep making a big deal about measles and how deadly it is. Let me use CDC data and tell you the truth about measles. And you make a big deal about polio, and polio has not been in the Western Hemisphere since 1991. It's been certified polio free since 1994, and we're giving kids 4 or 5 polio vaccines because we're vaccinating against a ghost.
Yeah.
Do you know that there's formaldehyde in those vaccines? Do you know what, so, and educate them on what the ingredients are, what you're injecting into these children? Um, I just, that's my personal punch list, is that I hope that I get to be on an advisory committee. What I would really like to see Bobby really, really do is take on things like the school lunch program and really
Yeah.
change that around. I had overheard a conversation at a event that I was in Washington D.C., and I thought it was a really good idea about changing the incentive programs inside of the food stamp program. That you're supposed to get. I'm just going to make a number up. Let's say you get $100 a week in food stamps. We can't tell you you can only buy these things with these food stamps, but we're going to give you $70 in food stamps to buy whatever you want, but you'll get an extra $30 to buy good quality food.
Mm.
So you get the same amount of money, but you incentivize people's thinking to choose differently, which I
Yeah.
thought was a really, really good idea. I think there's a lot of incentivization types of programs like that. They've got to fix the Medicare problem. I mean, Medicare was broke in 1995. I don't know how they patched it together for so long. So they've got to really work with CMS. The CDC director, the one that's been nominated, Dave Weldon. He was a physician, and then he was a senator, and he's been out of the Senate in Florida for a while, and he was involved in a lot of the autism hearings in the early 2000s, so he's been around our community for a
Okay.
while. And I hope that he really digs into the vaccine research that's gone on down at the CDC. I hope Bobby can make a big difference in the USDA in terms of helping the farmers and
Yeah.
and taking the chains off of them and getting away from big food and the feedlots and the
Yeah.
having 70,000 chickens in one smelly awful
Yeah.
place and
Yeah.
the cruelty to animal stuff that they do. I mean, there he's talked about that, and I those are the sorts of things that I know that he's really passionate about. I'm sure that he's got a laundry list as long as both arms
Yeah.
of things
And
that he
it
hopes to
comes
get.
down, Dr. Tenpenny, everything that you're saying really fundamentally comes down to breaking the back of the
Deep state.
extraordinary economic and financial and political conflicts of interest that
Yep.
exist here, number one. And number two, genuinely following good science. Those are the two things right there. And those two very noble objectives are what is provoking, in my view, all of this vicious retaliation against RFK Jr. in this committee, based on what I've seen.
Yeah, one of the committee members was like, "Well, so how many studies? I mean, the studies have already been done." Well, they've been done doesn't mean that they're worth anything, and
Right.
it doesn't mean that
Well,
they can. They
exactly.
do. They, I can't tell you when, particularly, I haven't done so much lately, but early on when I was really investigating, like maybe 15 years ago, how many full studies of vaccine studies I've read. I subscribe to the Pediatric Infectious Disease Journal, to the New England Journal. There was services that you could tap into. I can't tell you how many studies that I read the full study, and you get down to the end of it and you go, how did they conclude that off of that? That, and
Yeah.
then they take the conclusion, they put it into an abstract. Then there's a one sentence conclusion of the abstract. So it's like the only thing that they're doing is writing something. So when physicians flip through the pages and they read the conclusion of the abstract, it just ensures that the researchers are going to get their next round of funding.
Yeah.
It isn't anything about the truth. And
Don't
so
ever question their findings. Don't ever question their findings, no matter how suspicious or no matter how biased. Don't
yep.
ever go back and look at their studies and see if they actually are accurate.
Well,
And
that's
there's
when
That
when
probably
scares
a
them.
and there's probably a great deal of good studies that have been buried. I'm sure that's
Oh
part of
yeah,
this
that's
as
the
well.
17,000 studies that I have, that they're all from mainstream medical journals, and it's because, you know, I use this. I'll tell you this story really quick because I know we're coming down to the end of the time here. Years ago, I spoke in front of the Ohio Osteopathic Association. There's about maybe 300 doctors in the room, mostly men, and so before I went to speak to them, that it was on a Saturday, so I picked up that week's version of Sports Illustrated. And when I got up in front of the whole group, I said, "How many people here subscribe to Sports Illustrated?" This was maybe 20 years ago, so most of the men raised their hand. And I said, "How many of you read the article about this week's the women's field hockey tournament in Brazil?" No hands went up. So I
Right.
opened it up and I turned it around and I said, "It's here, right here on this page, whatever it was." I said, "That's exactly what you do to studies that you're not interested in. If it doesn't fall into your paradigm, if it's something that says something about bad about vaccines, if it says something about nutrition, if it says something about being able to heal kidney disease by taking magnesium, any of those things, you just flip right by it. You not only do you not read it, you swear that there's nothing published about it."
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Because so
I,
much of it has been suppressed.
and I can't tell you how many doctors came up to me that weekend of that thing. And they said, "Man, busted my chops on that one, man. You're absolutely right." And
Yeah,
it's really true.
it is true. Well, so much on the line here with regard to RFK Jr.'s confirmation. Literally, this is such an historic moment in our country. And it is just profoundly important that he be confirmed. By the way, we have LaCAG, Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, our organization down here, has a call to action at lacag.org, and we're encouraging all of our members and citizens across the state to send communications to Senator Cassidy and Senator Kennedy, our senators here, and we've gotten hundreds of them out so far. And so we're doing our part, and other groups are doing their part. What else do you think, Dr. Tenpenny, right now, can people be doing at this moment to try to ensure that RFK Jr. gets across the finish line here?
I think the biggest and most important thing is to pray.
Yeah.
To pray that thy will be done, and that the most important thing to save this country is to put the right people in leadership positions. And it's the one time, if we don't do it now, this is, I think, our last chance to try to put open-minded, conservative, right-leaning people into these wheelhouses to really make a difference. If we don't do it, if not now, when? If not, if not me, who?
Right.
So everybody needs to keep their hands on the steering wheel. And even when Bobby gets confirmed, and Cash Patel gets confirmed, and you know thankfully Pete Hegseth and a lot of the other cabinet members that President Trump wanted, that once they get in there and they're buried in the swamp, that they stay true to the cause. And
Huge.
they once, because when you're in there and you're constantly getting barraged every day, it's easy to lose your compass. And
Very
so
easy, and it happens all the
all the
time, not
time.
only in the federal level, but certainly on the state level. Well,
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and even Dr. Tenpenny, as you were saying that, the scripture came to mind, and I don't know the reference, but the Lord can move the hearts of kings like channels of water. And I
yeah.
think that's a prayer that we should be praying, that He would move the hearts of kings, the senators who need to vote the right way, but also, like you said, for the ones that when they get in there, that they would be led and guided by the Lord, and they wouldn't fall under the tidal wave of
The
or the
deep state.
riptide of the swamp.
yeah,
And so I think that, once they're in there, everybody listening and all your friends and neighbors and everybody else, so everybody needs to keep their eye on the ball. Keep
yeah,
holding them accountable,
Yep.
because our country, we've almost lost our country because we don't hold them accountable. We don't
that's
put their
exactly
feet on the
right.
fire. We don't get involved. I mean, one of the senators said today, or maybe it was yesterday, he said, well, Bobby, you're really influential and you have incredible support. He said, I've been through a lot of these hearings. I don't think I've ever seen a single candidate fill an overfill room and the hallway to showing their level of support. He said, most
Wow.
people really don't care. Well, now that we're caring, we have to keep caring. We have to
Exactly.
keep our hands on the steering wheel and our foot on the accelerator.
No
You're
doubt
right.
about it. And the American people, no question, are overwhelmingly behind RFK Jr. Notwithstanding the vocal opposition of these entrenched, narrow but powerful special interests who are opposed to him,
Yep.
the American people are 100% behind him. Before we let you go, Dr. Tenpenny, I want to remind our listeners that back on Tuesday of next week, we will have J.J. Carroll on the State of Freedom, former Border Patrol agent, who will talk about Tom Homan, the new head of Border Patrol, and how he is working so diligently to locate all of these hundreds of thousands of vulnerable children, migrants who are lost somewhere in our country and being exposed to God only knows what horrors. So we should pray for them also, and by God's grace and beneficence, bring them back to safety. And that's my daily prayer as well. Dr. Tenpenny, I hope that you have the opportunity to work closely with RFK Jr., not if, but when he is
That's
confirmed.
right.
You are a truly great American and a woman of great courage. And we just want to appreciate your being here with us today on the State of Freedom.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate being here. And thank you so much for having me. And just to encourage all your listeners, keep praying, keep pushing, keep holding them accountable, because we, the people, it's our country and we get the government we deserve.
As
Amen.
Jay, it's so interesting, Dr. Tenpenny, that you say that quote because you know who said that. It was Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s uncle, John F.
Oh,
Kennedy, who said,
wow.
"We are the boss and we will get the government we demand and we deserve." So it's very fitting
Hmm.
that you would reference that.
I didn't even know that, but yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay,
God
good.
bless you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Tenpenny. That was
Uh,
wonderful.